Okay. All right, so what I want to talk about today is the foundations of the halacha, of what the status of Nisuim Ezrachiyim is, or you could call it Zugiyut Lelo Chuppah V'Kiddushin. They're not necessarily the same thing, because Nisuim Ezrachiyim, civil marriage, means people did get married in some other type of ceremony, as opposed to Zugiyut Lelo Chuppah V'Kiddushin. It includes more than that. It includes people who just didn't get married, decided not to get married, but are nonetheless living together, and what the halachic status of that is. Okay? The way to start this discussion from the sources is to look at a Gemara in Gittin on Daf Pei Aleph, and from there, from this Gemara here, there emerge two different problems which you have to approach independently, and they come together, they intersect in the question that we want to deal with. All right, so let's start with this Mishnah here, Sham Pei Aleph Amud Aleph in Gittin. So the Mishnah says, "Hamigaresh tishto v'lana imo b'pundiki." So a couple gets divorced, and then they're together someplace else, right? So the question is, was there kiddushin or not? Beit Shammai omrim, einat tzricha himenu get sheni, Beit Hillel omrim, tzricha himenu get sheni. So Beit Shammai are not choshesh that there was another kiddushin here, and Beit Hillel are choshesh that there was another kiddushin here. Okay? What is the machloket about? So here we have two versions of what the machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is about. Okay? It's a machloket amoraim. Okay? The Mishnah is one position, and the Bright is another position. Let's see. Amar Rabba Bar Rachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Machloket b'shera'ua sheniv'ala. There's no safek that they had sexual relations. The Beit Shammai, so that was the machloket. The Beit Shammai savri adam oseh bilato bilat znut. Beit Hillel savri ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. Okay, so we know that there was bi'ilah. The question is what the nature of this bi'ilah is. Apparently they're not around that we should ask them, or they're not cooperating, or they're not believed. Okay? But in any case, we don't know the nature of the bi'ilah. So Beit Shammai, no pessimist in terms of human nature, says they had relations, they're not married, they had relations, there's no reason to assume the relations were anything but bi'ilat znut. Okay? And Beit Hillel savri ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. People, unless you know otherwise, of course, do not have sexual relations which are illicit. So we assume that the bi'ilah was l'shem kiddushin. Okay? So that's why, or at least on the level of a chashash. We don't know for sure, but when it's a Beit Hillel, tzricha himenu get sheni is presumably is misafek. Right? She can't now just go off and get married to someone else. We know she was with her ex-husband, so we assume that that there was a kiddushin shniyim. Okay, so that's one explanation of machloket. The question being, do or do we not apply a chazakah in this case? I'm being very careful how I'm formulating it. Do or do we not formulate the chazakah ve'ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut in this case, okay, where Beit Shammai does not apply the chazakah and Beit Hillel does apply the chazakah? You mean that
normally Beit Shammai would agree to that chazakah?
I don't know. I'm just being very careful.
Because they had been divorced.
I don't know. I'm just saying what I have. I'm being very empirical. I don't want to make any generalizations. If this is the case, this is the case. I don't know more than that right now. Okay. The second way of explaining the machloket is follows in the Gemara. So we say, let's see, towards the end of the Gemara, b'may pligi, umatnitin do kimna below rawash nivala b'may pligi, deika ede yichud, I skipped down. It's 4 lines from the bottom of the quote. But my pligi.
Who says?
1 minute.
Who says shelo ra'uha shenivala? Do we know?
Matnitin do kimna below ra'uha shenivala. It's the
say-
Mishnah. It has to be because the Mishnah from the context. Okay.
Oh.
But my pligi. Diika edei yichud veleka edei bia. So it's not a question of what the nature of the bia is, but it becomes a question of the necessity for proper edut. So there's edei yichud. We saw them go in together. Veleka edei bia, but nobody saw the actual act. Beit Shammai savri lo amrinan hein edei yichud hein edei bia. Beit Shammai says that we do not say that the Eidim on the Yichud are equivalent to Eidim on Bia, and you require that in this case. Okay? Ubeit Hillel Savri Amrinan Hein Eidei Yichud v'Hein Eidei Bia. That even though all you have is Eidei Yichud, that is equivalent to Eidei Bia, and Yechoshesh v'Kiddushin. Okay? So there are 2 issues here. Yeah.
Today, the Eidei Yichud, what's called today the Eidim, do they have any halachic status?
If you say that you need Eidut L'Kiyum Hadavar for Chuppah, that's their status. Right?
Usually it's the same Eidim as the... It
Not
doesn't
necessarily.
matter.
No, it doesn't have to
matter.
be. No, it's not considered like Chatzi Davar. Like Davar v'lo Chatzi Davar, Eidim have to be Eidim on a whole thing, on a whole act. They can't. That's fine. They can be different Eidim. So you're looking to give out Kibudim, you can
Right.
you can break up the Kibudim.
Right.
So there are 2 separate issues at hand. One is the nature of the Bia. Do we say the Bia was a Bila Znut, or the Bila was a Bila L'Shem Kiddushay Bia? That's one question. And another question is when you don't see the Bia, so there's a question of the evidence of the halakha that you need Eidut L'Kiyum Davar by Kiddushin. And even if you assume that there was relations, nonetheless, can you say Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Eidei Bia under these
That assumes
circumstances?
it's not a Bilat Stuka. The second
They're
thing-
right. It assumes that it's not a bilat znut. Right. Okay. So those are the two questions. So of course, if you're talking about civil marriage, or if you're talking about a couple that is living together without any marriage at all, or if you're talking about a couple, as you said, Chuvot, in the Chuvah the Rivash, a couple that got married, Anusim, they got married after the imposition of the Inquisition, and they got married in a church. So it's not civil marriage, right? It's certainly halachically different to get married in a church than it is to get married by Elvis, right? So what the status of that is. So there are 2 questions at hand, right? One question is, do we say that there was Kiddushay Bia here, even though there was no Kiddushin of Kesef and there was no Har'el B'Kodesh Li? Certainly in church they didn't say Kedat Moshe Yisrael, right? But afterwards there was Bia, maybe Ein Adam Aseh Bilato Bilad Znut, there was specific Kiddushay Bia. That's one question, and of course the other question is where the Eidim are there. Even if there are Eidei Yichud, there's no Eidei Bia, and then the question, of course, is like what constitutes Eidei Yichud. We'll talk about that also. That do we need Eidim at least to see the Yichud, or the fact that everybody knows, right? What's called Yidu'ah B'Tzibur. The fact that everybody knows, does that constitute Eidut, as we require it when we say we require Eidut L'Kiyum Davar for Gittin and Kiddushin? Okay. What? That means we know that there was Bia, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't Eidut on the Bia.
It doesn't count as Eidut on the Bia.
No.
You might have been in that conversation.
No.
It could have been that she advocated
Okay, that's it.
someone else.
So we'll talk about, hold on. So we'll talk about, so before we talk about the whole question of Eidut, right, evidence, right, let's talk about Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilat Znut. So that's the first question I want to deal with. And the second question I want to deal with is this halacha of Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Eidei Bia. Okay? Okay. So in terms of Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilat Znut, what we want to know really is what are the parameters of this chazak? Because we obviously do know there's such a thing as bilad znut, right? So we can't go rosh bakir. We say ein adam oseh bilato bilad znut. Obviously, there's no chazaka that people are never chotek. Right? So what is ein adam oseh bilato bilad znut? When do we apply that? Right? So let's take a look at the Tosfot. Basically, I'm dealing the sources. The sources here are on page one that's labeled page 11, right? Okay. So Beit Shammai Omrim, Beit Shammai Savri. You see the Tosfot? Pe'alchon Beti B'matchil Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai Savri, Adam Boel Bilat Znut. Af agav di bevamot perak Beit Shammai, Amar Beit Shammai, de'ein mima'anim ela arusot v'lo nesuot. Okay, the halacha is Kedushei Miyun. Do you know what that is? Yeah. Right. A katana whose father is not alive, so her mother and her achim can accept Kedushin on her behalf. And that Kedushin is b'drabbanan. Okay? The reason it's called Kedushei Miyun because when she gets older, she can reject the Kiddushin. Okay? So this can only be the rejection, according to the Mishnah here, Ein ma'anim ela arusot v'lo nisuot. Once a nisuin occurs, there's no possibility of miyun, because we say there's Kiddushay bia, because Ein adam oseh bilato bilad znut. Okay? V'lo nisuot. Ufarish Rav Yosef Rabba Tamid de Beit Shammai Mishum de Ein Adam Boel Bilato Bilad Znut Ulahachi Nisuot Ein Yicholot L'Ma'eh. Okay? Because there was Nisun already, there was Bia.
I'm sorry, but the Bia happened before she's 12?
No.
Why?
Bia could have happened after.
I thought
At the
I
moment.
thought at 12 is when she could do the Bia. And once that passed.
All right, so then the presumable the presumption of Bia happens before the Miyun, whatever age it happened at.
Right, but that's a little bit disturbing.
Wait a second.
In different societies, people develop at different times. It would be disturbing today if it was normal for girls then to get married when they're 12 or 11 or 10, and boys were 13, 14. So then that was normal then. You can't take the norms of the 21st century and put them 2,000 years in the past. It's like
point at an age of
okay, but we're not anthropologists, and I don't know exactly the ages are. So I wanted to derive the legal principles without getting into the
Beit
anthropology.
Shammai is saying that this girl was married off by her mother or brother,
Yeah.
and if the husband had sex with her, she's lost her right to do miyun?
Yes.
But I thought that was the whole point of miyun, that if she was married off by her mother and
No,
brother...
so he's saying only in Arusa. Because Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut, and then she's there was Kiddushin D'Oraita. Then there's the option of trying to get a get, wherever that takes you, right? So the reason given for Beit Shammai is Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut. But over here in the Gemara Gittin, we said Beit Shammai thinks Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut. So Tosos' answer is that it depends on the circumstances. Tosos says, Ikal Meimar, Dahatam, Kevin Shira'inu Shekidsha, Vadai Eino Rotze Liv'ol Bi'ilato Bilad Znut. Since there was Kiddushay Miyun, so the intention of the man and the intention of the woman is that they have a legal, recognized relationship. So why should you assume that the sexual relationship that they have between them is Bilad Znut?
But she's not a
She's not
woman.
an adult. That's the part I was.
She's not an adult.
That is not an issue in this. That's not an issue in this case, right? It's not an issue in this case. Okay? So that we don't assume that that the Bilah was a Bilad Znut. Aval hacha shelo ra'inu hakidushin. Here there's no kiddushin. They were married before. Now there was a get, and now they're together. So, if the relationship is a halachically valid relationship that they're in, so the bia that happens within that relationship, we have no reason to assume that it's not a bilad znut. Right? So that's why Beit Shammai says Ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut in Yevamot. But in this case, since we're talking about a relationship which is, as far as we know, outside of marriage, right? They were married, they're not married anymore, so therefore, Ein adam, therefore we say, Adam oseh bilato bilat znut. So that's what Tosfos says. So what we have here is a very important principle, which really, even without the Tosfos, we should have figured it out, that it's not absolute. Obviously, there are cases where people oseh, we know there's such a thing as bilat znut, so that obviously there are cases where people oseh bilatam bilat znut. But it means that under certain circumstances, we assume the best of people. Right? We assume that the bilah is not a bilat znut. And the question is, what are the circumstances? When are we willing to say such a chazakah of ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut, and when are we not? Okay? The Rambam in Hilchot Gerushin brings, and I showed this to you, I think, is it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, before Hanukkah. Let's look at the Rambam here. This is in the additional papers that I gave out. Okay? If you take a look, in Hilchot Gerushin, Perek Yud Halacha Yud Tet. Okay? Horu miktzat gaonim.
Right?
I'm in the Rambam, Perek Yud Hilchot Gerushin Halacha Yud Tet. Horu miktzat gaonim. Shekol isha shetibael b'fnei edim tzricha get. That's not the Gemara in Gittin, right? Gemara in Gittin is a specific case of halan im grushato b'pundiki. Okay? Haru miktzat hagonim shekol isha shetibael b'fnei edim tzricha get. Chazaka she'ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. Vigdilu v'hosifu b'davar zeh she'ala al da'atam ad shehoru shemi sheyesh lo ben mishivchato choshishin lo laben hazeh v'lo tityaben ishto. And then he died. What's the case? First of all, what's the halacha? Halacha is if a man dies childless meaning zera hamyuchas acharav, then his wife needs either yibum or chalitza. Okay? If he has children, but the children are not miyuchasim lo, in other words, if he has non-Jewish children, right, or children who are avadim, so they're not halachically his children, so the woman is still skuka, his wife, the almana, is still skuka liyibum. Okay? So here we have a situation, and this was based, I read to you the case from the Otzar Gonim back then, right? The case was,
Freed his slave.
what?
He surely freed his slave.
If you surely freed a slave. The case was, there was a fellow named, well, I say fellow, right? Some people refer to him as Rav Bustanai, and some people just called him Bustanai. He was the Reish Galuta at the time when Omar, as in the Dome of the Rock Omar, was the Khalif. And when he captured the Middle East, Omar, not Bustanai, that would have been a different thing in world history that we missed. When Omar conquered the Middle East and he conquered Persia, so as the minhag in the good old days in the Middle East was that the victorious men take the vanquished women, the princesses, for themselves. So there were two sisters, Persian princesses. One he took for himself, and the other one he magnanimously gave to his Jewish friend Bustanai, who was the Reish Galuta. Okay? And Bustanai had a child with the Persian princess.
Not Jewish?
What? She was Persian. She was a Persian princess. And Bustanai, who was the Reish Galuta, had a child with this princess. And when he died, of course there were other children from a Jewish wife, and when he died, the machloket which ensued sounded like this. The children of the princess said, we should be Reish Galuta. And the children of the Jewish wife said, we're Reish Galuta and you're our Eved, because you're the son of a Shifcha Knaanit, and that makes you an Eved Knaani, and we're Yoresh you. Okay? And this went on a couple of generations. It was a big deal in Bavel, right? And it's in the Otzar Gaonim, and it made it into the Rambam, right? as Horu Mikta Sagaonim, right, that because of the chazak of Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilat Znut, that he must have freed her before he had relations with her, and therefore the child is his child, and the child is Jewish, right? And everything that follows, right? Okay, so, what?
I just find the perception about human nature is just ridiculous. As if someone would never sleep with their maid or their servant without making them...
Okay, so this is what the Rambam also thinks is ridiculous, okay? Chazaka she'en adam oseh bilato bilat znut, v'gdilu v'osifu b'davar, but not bustana, right? V'osifu b'davar zeh, sha'ala al da'atam, right? He's basically saying they were hallucinating when they came up with this pshat. Okay? B'davar zeh sha'ala al da'atam, ad she'oru shemi sheyesh lo ben mishifchato, choshishin lo, v'lo tityabein ishto. Right? We assume that the child is his in order to prevent the woman from the almana from having yibum. Shema shichrer shifchato, v'achar kach ba'aleha. Okay? V'yesh mi shehora shevadai shichrer she'ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut. Okay? V'chol advarim ha'elu rechokim heim be'enai. This is the Rambam. Kol advarim ha'elu rechokim heim be'enai ad ma'od. Midarkei hahora'ah, ve'ein ra'ui l'smoch alehem. Shelo amru chachamim chazaka zo, he limits the parameters of chazaka. Ela be'ishto shegirsha bilvad. So you have a case of Achles Gittin. They were married, and then they got together again. So there we make the assumption that they decided to get together again. A person doesn't have an affair with his grusha. If he gets together again, so it means that we at least have to be choshesh that that there was kiddushin, okay? Ela b'ishto shegirsha bilvad, o b'makadesh al t'nai, right? U'ba'al stam, sharehi ishto, u'b'ishto in the case of mikadesh, right? U'b'ishto hu sheches kato she'en oseh bilato bilat znut. Ad shifaresh sheyesh bilat znut, shehi b'shila bilat znut, okay? It's like l'shem peirud kutcha brichu mishchinte, right? They say that, haredi ba'alayich bilad znut, whatever, okay? O sheyifaresh she'al t'nai hu bo'el. Aval b'shar hanashim, harei kol zona b'cheskat sheba'al l'shem znut, ad shifareshu l'shem kiddushin. Ve'ein tzorich lomar b'shifcha o b'goya, she'ena bat kiddushin. So there's a double thing. Mela, if he has a relationship with a Jewish woman, they're not married. So all he had to do was mekadesh b'biyah. That's one step. He's not willing to take that step. But to say the man had a relationship with a Persian princess, right? So what has to happen? So first, if she's a shifcha, he has to mishachra her. If she's a goya, she has to mitgayer. So all this happened like in the passion of the moment. Tell me about it, right? All right. She'ein choshim lahem klal. V'harei aben mehem b'cheskat goy ve'eved ad sheyodea bevadai shenishtachrara imo o nitgaira. Okay. So that's the Rambam. He limits the parameters of this chazaka to the cases in which they appear in the Gemara. Namely, where they at least have a relationship, or they already, or in the past they had a relationship which was halachic, and now we see them together. So do we assume that what's happening is within the bounds of halacha or not? So I at least have to be choshesh that what I see is happening within the bounds of halacha. Okay, for the chumrot that are involved. Okay, the Ravid disagrees, but he draws a distinction between. He goes halfway. The Ravid says, "Amar Abraham begoya vaday kein hu kidvarav." He's right when it comes to goya. Shere'ein biyado legaira. It's not up to him. Okay. So there, let's say if he can have the be'ilah without a bilat znut. It's like Molshavik hetera v'achil isura. Person has two things in front of them. One's mutter, one's asur. We don't assume that they're going to take dafka the isur. Right? So it's biyado he can be mishacher her. But in the case of goya, it's not biyado legaira. She might not be interested in being mitgayeret, right? She'ein biyado legaira. But b'shifchato sheyesh biyado l'shachrara Divrayim krovim. He can see the Divrei HaGaonim. The lo shavik heter v'ach isura, elam kein huchzak bepritzut arayot, unless we know he's with that type of guy. Okay? V'chein bat Yisrael shetibael be'edim, im lo hayu chashudim bepritzut arayot. Okay? If they're normal people, right? This is obviously something that changes what normal people is, right? But if they're people who are not chashudim bepritzut arayot, hamei b'nei Yisrael, b'not Yisrael al cheskatan, ובחזקת כשרותיהן, שלא יתפרצו בפני עדים לזנות. These were their עדים, right? What goes on בחדרי חדרים? So nobody knows, right? But if they're עדים here, נבעלו לפני עדים, they were עדי ייחוד, so we assume that it was l'shem kiddush. Okay? So we have three positions here. You have the position, you have the position of the Gaonim with the way the Rambam presents them, that in any case, we say, Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut, unless we know it's Bilad Znut. Again, we're not so naive that if we see that it's, that he went to a certain district in Amsterdam or whatever, we're going to say that it was a Shem Kiddushin, right? But if all things being equal under normal circumstances, according to the Gaonim, we say Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut, and we choshesh for Kiddushin. The Rambam says you only choshesh for Kiddushin when there's solid grounds to make such an assumption. Okay? And the Raavad distinguishes between whether it's biyado or not biyado. He sees it in terms of lo shavik isur, lo shavik heter va'achil isura. So if there's a possibility to say that that he made it mutter, we assume that he made it mutter. There isn't such a possibility. We don't say that he was such a tzaddik that he waited for the Gioret to go study the whole course and go be different crazy by the Rabbanut. And then, 27 years later, she went to the mikveh and he waited in the Passion Haba. Right? So that we don't assume. Okay?
Because we know that it wasn't 27 years
Okay,
later.
right. Okay.
Is it also connected to the need for aiding though? He specifies about the aiding. So
I want to talk about Eidim as a separate discussion. Right? So obviously the issue of Kiddushin involves the issue of Eidim. Yeah. So
it seems like you don't assume that they had. If there weren't any Eidim, then we assume it was Bilat Snoot, or it doesn't count. It doesn't matter whether it was Bilat Snoot.
It doesn't matter if there are no Eidim.
Because you need to have Eidim. So even
Right.
if they intended to have Kiddushin, they're not Tofsim.
Right. That's
So it wasn't Bilat Snoot.
Well, it turned out it was a Bilah. Maybe their intention wasn't that if they didn't know that you need Eidim, so their intention is that's between them and their Rebbeinu Shalom, right? But that's not our issue. There'll be no Kiddush. Okay. What seems to be the situation according to the Gaonim, just in order to understand what the nature of this Chazakah is according to the Gaonim, is it seems that what drives the Gaonim is the Isser. Since there's an Isser Panui Habal HaPnuya, we assume, unless we know otherwise, that because there's some sort of Cheskat Kashrut, that people will not be over the Isser Panui Habal HaPnuya. What is the Isser, right? Take a look at the, there's a shut of the Rivash here. He also assumes that the considerations are halachic. You'll see what the alternative is in a minute, but let's see. The case was as follows. This is Shut HaRivash from the source sheet number 11. Okay, so a woman comes with a baby. They got married. Who's the baby? What happened? She married this guy, an anus. She's an anus. She married the guy in church. After 3 months, they lived together. They were married. Not Kedat Moshe Yisrael. And after 3 months, the guy took off. Okay, hasn't been seen since. Okay, so the question is, can we be matir her without a get? Okay, so he says, he says his initial reaction and his psak is yes, mat is not a problem. But let's just see here. He talks about why aren't we choshesh for ein adam oseh bilato bilat znut? Let's see. So he says. Hold on. It's a long tshuva here. Towards the end, okay, the second page. He says, yeah, let's pick it up from here. Let's see. Ubenidon zeh.
Right.
Okay. The first word on the line, I'm about 2/3 of the way down.
First word is davar.
Davar, right. Okay. The first word is davar. Okay. Go in, says ubenidon zeh. Right? In this case, which I just described to you, right? Vadai ein lecha prutzim yoter me'elu holchim b'rtzon nafsham lefnei avodat kochavim lishtachavot sham u'ma'aseihem mochichim b'pritzutam u'bekalutam va'af ki ba'avonot achar ha'gzeira was after the Inquisition zulat ti yichidim mi'uta demi'uta rabu ha'mitpartzim biznut shel nochriyot. So all the men went after the non-Jewish woman. Right? And this guy, right? Right? So this guy obviously can say that the fact that they had relations is this guy who got married in church, who left his pregnant wife, we're going to say that he was so that he's chadlik sherei Israel. Or the af imaytani da gamkein amru de l'shem kiddushin ba'il. It's beferish against the rivash. Even if she was a nida, two different things. It's not a halach. It's not a chazaka based on halachic behavior. It's a chazaka based on people that have relations generally want to be married to each other. That was the assumption that was being made. Okay, and he quotes the Rivash explicitly, right? V'kevan shebenida tofsina kiddushin v'adai l'shem kiddushin ba'il v'im ki Rivash katav da da da. Okay, so the Rivash katav. He says that's according to the Gaonim. Okay? So he basically says the machlok between the Rambam and the Gaonim is around not only the parameters of ein adam oseh bilato if you're just looking at it halachically. Person who's not from, right, who's not committed to the halacha, he would be over the Isur Panuya, or she would be over the Isur Panuya Ba'ala Pnuya. Okay? So there you don't have Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilat Znut. Whereas according to the Rambam, it's clear there's no difference between Grushato or anybody else. So there the nature of the Chazaka is more of a sociological, moral Chazaka. That people generally, normal, quote-unquote, decent people, right, want to have relations with another person within a legal and recognized context. And that's what Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilat Znut means. Okay? That's basically the way the Or Sameach understands the machlok. If we go back to the Rivash, there's something, the two things that we want to discuss in the Rivash still, in this tshuva. One is, and it's relevant today in terms of how you understand what the situation would be today. So he talks there about, what?
It's harder to undo based on, according to the Or Sameach's rationale, that the chazaka is all about a person's desire to formalize a relationship.
Right.
It's much harder then to undo it.
No, then we say that we choshesh for kiddushin.
Right. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need to get.
Yeah.
It
It
complicates
depends on
the
what the thing is.
situation.
You wouldn't say that about a one-night stand.
Right. You wouldn't say where it's clear that the behavior is a bilat znut.
Right.
Right, I understand.
It's
Right, so
still
the
would have
Rambam
to
doesn't-
be a context like in the similar one to the Rambam's talking about. They've been living together for 5 years. They have shared banking.
Right, exactly. So those type of things, right? But so there are two. I drew a distinction in two different situations. So one is it would be like civil marriage, and others that they're living together, and then it's not necessarily the same. And what happens in Israel is not the same thing that happens in Chutz La'aretz. Right? The case that the Rivash was talking about is that the couple actually got married in church. So there you could really pull it, and he actually discussed it. You could really pull it in two directions. You could say, how could you be choshesh for kiddushin? They got married in a church, Rabbanu Shalom, right? So there's nothing. Where's the Kedat Moshe Yisrael here, right? So that's mitzad echad. Mitzad sheni, you could say, look, they got married in church. They want to be together. They don't know the halacha. They don't know, right? Or they're anusim. The case is that they were anusim. So there maybe you have choshesh v'kiddushay bia, assuming that you've overcome the problem of edut, which let's leave that aside for now. Okay. In terms of bia itself, maybe you have to be choshesh. So you could see, you have to look at each circumstance differently. You have a couple of that alu mi britam atzot l'sha'avar, right? They got married. They didn't have civil. They only had civil marriage, I assume, right? So they got married in Moscow, Justice of the Peace. However, they got married in Russia. So they didn't have any alternative. So the fact they got married civilly, what does that mean? They did want to be mekei mishpacha, so maybe you do have to be choshesh that the bia afterwards is l'shem kiddushin. But if somebody gets married civil marriage in Williamsburg, right, where it's clearly that they made a choice to get married civilly, or if a couple gets married, or a couple flies to Greece or to whatever, or to Cyprus closer. There are. I looked on the web. There are these companies that specialize. You can just do the wedding and like in one day, or you can have a little. They'll do a honeymoon also for you, and they'll do a party, and they have these hotels by the sea. Anyway, it's very nice. Anyway. In any case, or if a couple has Tzipi Livni being beside a Kiddushin for them in the state of Israel, right? So clearly there they're making a statement that they don't want it al pi dat Moshe Yisrael. So there you can't come along and say, they want to live together. Sure, they want to live together, but they don't want al pi dat Moshe Yisrael. So that's also pretty clear.
Maybe the Rabbanut won't let them get married, and therefore they have no choice.
No, so let's talk about the regular case, right? So that also
If there's no kosher,
no, because the Kiddushin can be Tovsin. The Kiddushin can be Tovsin.
He's a Kohen.
Depends what the issue is.
In most of the cases, the Chayvei Lavin. Talking about Gilui Arayis.
He's a Kohen. She's a Grusha.
We're talking about Chayvei
not
Lavin,
Jewish.
right? Okay. So if she's not Jewish, then there's no.
Right, that's what I was saying.
Right.
But then
Okay, so that's one thing that has to be brought into the picture, that getting married, even saying civil marriage, right? Civil marriage where? Civil marriage in the state of Israel where you're willing to go to jail, because they still didn't take the law off the books. So you can go to jail for 2 years if you get married. Law Pihara. Directly related to the issue of civil marriage at all, but it's a fascinating idea that he's willing to consider, even if just long enough to reject it. If you look in the middle of the second page of the Rivash, he says as follows. They said, V'chi okay, it's actually towards the top, about a quarter of the way down. The first word on the line is Ella. You see that? You go in, it says V'chi Tema. They opened up the Rashi Tevot. Okay? V'chi Tema. They got married in church. And he wants to say, maybe B'chol Zot, there was some sort of Kiddushin, right? V'ha amrinan b'Sanhedrin de b'nei Noach b'ulat Baal yesh lahen. Listen what he's raising. Maybe, okay, there was no Kiddushin here. But they got married in church. So it's b'nei Noach. So maybe they have Kiddushay b'nei Noach. Maybe they're married the way Goyim are married to each other. Goyish and Nachas, right? So the two Jews go, it's the opening of a joke, right? Two Jews go to a church to get married, right? And we want to say there's no Kiddushin, because it's not Kedat Moshe Yisrael, and he describes that the priest gave, I have no idea what they actually do, but he gives each one a ring and he blesses them, right? So there's no nitina. She said, but if it's Bnei Noach, so Bnei Noach, the Gemara says, have ishut, right? Bnei Noach bulad baal yesh lahem. Nichnesa lechupa v'lo niv'ala ein lahem, right? But they have ishut. Umuzharim heim al eshet ish v'neheragim aleha, right? So they have ishut. Their hilchot ishut are different than ours, but they have ishut. Im kain b'nidon zeh shebe'er, that you brought to here, shetiye ishto kichukat ovdei kochavim. So let her be his wife, like a god. So you see what he's saying? It's ki'ilu that there are two maslulim of kiddushin for Jews. Jews are Jews, but they're also b'nei Noach. So you can do, you can bring. It's the time when you talk about kiddushin and its alternatives, right? And you talk about pilegesh. So forget about pilegesh. Talk about getting married in church, in a sense, getting married like a ben Noach. So now, first of all, you understand why the Rambam would bring the whole historical thing of before Matan Torah. It was like this, and after Mishnah Nitna Torah, it was like. So why bring the Rambam? Generally, doesn't bring historical surveys, right? So you could say that there's some halachic ramifications for this historical survey. Is that the fact is that there is kiddushin for Bnei Noach, and maybe when Jews do it like Bnei Noach, so they have the kiddushin of Bnei Noach. He just mentions this long enough to say it's insane, okay, halachically, which intuitively when you hear this, it's like it's crazy, but it's such an interesting idea, right? Harei at ishti b'bi'ah kedin ben Noach. So he says, Lohi. The ben Noach elo yishut b'ishto lechayev al mino, and with regards to other b'nei Noach, he says why it's impossible. Okay? Okay, but it's such an interesting idea so that comes up here. There's another possibility. A friend of mine raised this, I think you wrote an article about it. I never saw it. A friend of mine, Har'el, I think he wrote an article about Kiddushay B'nai Noach for Yisrael. I remember when I heard that he wrote it, I thought he was crazy.
But it makes sense.
It's oleh mitoch hadvarim here, even just to
But it
reject
also makes a lot of sense with what we were learning before about that you needed to know what you were doing. So say you had a couple in the Soviet Union, and they never heard of Kiddushin. So
Right.
you said, so how could you say that they had entered into something knowingly, that they a social structure that they didn't even know existed?
Right, so that's
So how could
obviously-
they have signed that check? So the same way maybe this couple, like in church, like they can only be, if I say or someone marries me, like Kedat Moshe Israel, so that's what I signed up for. I may not know all the fine print,
Right.
but that's what I
Right.
have a consciousness that that's what I'm doing.
Right.
But if someone, as far as they know, is getting married according to the rules of the communist government or the rules of this church, to say that they didn't realize it but accidentally were married by under this other set of halachot that they don't know exists.
Well, it's not
like,
the
I
same
think
thing.
that's-
These people, they were anusim, but they lived also before. The description of the case is
Right.
he
So
proposed to
we-
her and they were going to get married al pi halacha. And then in
So-
the meantime, it's like the Spanish Inquisition came in, like
So, not
in
those
between the time the
anusim, but-
invitations went out and the
was a
and
week-
the date they were supposed to get married.
week
I don't know,
later.
like who planned this wedding, right? But
So
in any
not this
case,
couple, but like their grandkids.
yeah, okay, so that would be a different. That would be a different situation.
So I'm saying so that,
Yeah.
I mean, I think the B'nai Noach argument makes a lot of sense in terms of you can't accidentally get married.
I understand, but the question is whether the laws of B'nai Noach, and I think the answer, the simple, straightforward halachic answer, the halachot of B'nai Noach do not apply to Jews. Jews have a different set of laws. The Jews are the jurisdiction of the Torah, of Torah's Moshe, and not of Shev Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. It's abundantly clear from the Sugyot and Sanhedrin. Okay, but that takes us far beyond the discussion here.
British also compared it to B'nai Noach.
No, I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure he did.
I think
More of a Homer type of-
He said that the Gerushin of that then they would beat up less than the Pilegish, and then the Gerushin would be similar, just like you released the Pilegish by just getting up. So if you release the
Oh yeah, that's what he says afterwards here. Yeah, okay. But that's where he's still entertaining this idea of Ben Noach.
No, but that's she's quoting through it, but it's not.
No, but I'm saying that's in
In here too.
that's in the Rivash. Okay.
The
Okay.
Sury's first case is also a case that they got married in Russia. So you're-
Right. Okay. We'll hopefully we'll get to this. We'll get to this later. Okay. So that's in terms of Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut. Truth is, we have here also. Actually, let's take a look at the Sridei Eish. So he talks about it in terms also. There are two cases here.
Where is the 3D?
Sridei Eish of Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg.
Where is it?
Oh,
It's another thing you said.
I sent that in the email. I sent that as an email.
If it's sociological, if it's not the Isser side, if it's sociological.
That's how the Sridei Eish also understands it.
Do we think that human attitude can also change?
I think it's pretty obvious.
Or it has?
Yeah. Well, I don't. The question is, I think it can. Whether it has, it could be still most people that have normal relations with the other sex and are not prutzim. If they're living together normally, they want to have some sort of misgarret that's recognized. Otherwise, why fight the state to get for recognition? Maybe just for the tax break. I don't know.
What I'm saying, or why not get? But they choose not to get married. So why?
But then-
I say people who are just living together. Is just the nature of not choosing to get married a sign enough?
That's what you have to think about. I don't have a clear answer for that. You have to look carefully again back at the Rivash. Going to church is enough of a sign, right? So you have to see how we phrase it, what you think, see others shoot in and see how they phrase it. Right?
Don't we have
Obviously,
this,
that's an open question. Huh?
don't we have this whole issue of Yidua, Yiduim, or Yid?
Well, that's a question whether that would be. That's exactly the question that Rachel is asking. So
I
what
think
would that
civil
status
marriage
be?
really does show something about their intent, possibly. I mean, you could still undo it as they clearly do, but just living together in a modern day.
Right,
seems-
right. That's right. Living together in the modern day. It's not a busha to be living together and not have a legal misgarret. And so then you wouldn't say. Here in the Sridei Eish, okay, so let's take a look. There are two tshuvot here. So the first one, there's a couple from. So what's important here, actually, he quotes. There's a tshuva of the Rogatchover, where he's choshesh for kiddushin. Okay. And he says, "Va'afilu im yodim sha'aish hazeh avaryan u'boel nidal mechalel Shabbat. Mikol makom yesh lomar bo ein adam boel bilad znut. Sovrim dechazaka de'ein adam boel bilad znut eino mitzad ha'isser, elo inyan nimusi u'mishpachti. Da'adam hagun rotze be'ishut b'chayei mishpacha kadat, v'lo l'chiyot im isha zona she'alula להפקיר את עצמה גם לאחרים. ויש שם בעצם עובדה שהם חיים בקביעות כאיש ואישה בחדר אחד, הוא מין קידושין. Okay? According to those that hold it, חופה אז קונה. ומכיוון שהכל יודעים שהם דרים יחד, הבי כמו קידושין בעדים. We're going to have to discuss. Okay? Whether if everybody knows, that's good enough. Okay. He's willing to be mekil based on Reb Chaim Oizer, and if there are other Gedolei Rabbanim,
Mekel.
mekil not to be choshesh for the kiddushin. Okay, that's what that means. Not to be choshesh for the
I thought
kiddushin.
you said that he was.
No, I said that he quotes the Rogatchover who was.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and he's willing to be mekil based on Reb Chaim Oizer and also based on Rabbi Raphael Shapira. Okay, you'll see the tshuva. The second tshuva is very interesting. Lidid Nafshi Arav Agon Mufusam Rav Levi Lezerovsky Shlita Av Bedin Minchen, 1951. My parents got married in Munich in 1950, and Rav Lezerovich was there, Masada Kedushin. So that's very fun. Anyway, I just have some pictures, but anyway. The same.
To go the chum on this in the modern day is just, you risk
Right.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, you are. So the question is whether there's a question of whether l'chatchila you would require a get and then b'di'evet. Right? That's what you get. If somebody came to you l'chatchila and said, "Should I get a get before I get married?" You would say, "Yeah, you should get a get before you get married." But if you say, "Well, I'm married and I have children," are they mamzerim? We say no. Right? So that's, and then the question is how again, every case is complicated and individual. Okay, so. Right, which is what the Sridei says. And why he says that at the end of the day you got to send it to Rav Herzog, because he's the Rav Rashi in Yerushalayim. Okay, so that's in terms of Ein Adam Oseh Bilato Bilad Znut. I'll tell you what. Let's take a 7-minute break, okay, and then we'll do Hein Ein Edei Yichud, Hein Ein Edei Bia. Okay. Now, so. You can turn on there. Now we're talking. Okay. Back to Torah. So we're talking the second issue that that we have to deal with is the whole discussion that we had for the first hour about whether the kiddushin, we can consider the bia that happened being l'shem kiddushin or not, assume that we somehow overcame the problem of edut. Because Kiddushin, as well as Gittin, requires Eidut L'Kiyum Davar, and this is the second thread that appears in the Gemara on Daf Pei Aleph in Gittin, where we attribute the difference between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel to revolve around whether we say Hein Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Hein Eidei Bia, under these circumstances. Under these circumstances, I mean that clearly under normal circumstances, when there was Kiddushay Bia, right, before Rav made the Gzeira not to be Mekadesh the Bia, when they had Kiddushay Bia, so it's clear they didn't need Eidim to be Eidim on the Bia. The Eidim were Eidim on the Yichud, right? And we said then, and everybody agreed, Hein Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Hein Eidei Bia. The question,
we don't really have something called Eidei Bia, do we? I mean,
our equivalent to is if the Eidim saw the Bia. Okay, that's what Hein Hein Eidei Yichud means. Hein Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Hein Eidei Bia means that the Eidim on the Yichud are equivalent as if they saw the Bia. Okay, and that is what you require because you require Eidut. Okay, the question arose in the particular case in Masechet Gittin. Because it's not a regular case where he calls Eidim and they prepare a hall and the invitations went out and there was no inquisition in the meantime and they're getting married, right? And they're going to have to do Shebia and there are Eidim that stand outside the Cheder Yichud. Okay, so there clearly we say Hein Hein Eidei Yichud, Hein Hein Eidei Bia. The case in Gittin on Daf Pei Aleph is where Lanai Mo Bepundaki. So do we assume, so there were Eidim there who were Eidim on the Yichud, do we say that the fact that there was Yichud and there are Eidim on the Yichud, can we say that there was Bia also, so that the Eidim on the Yichud can be considered Eidim on the Bia, since we don't know if there was Bia? Okay? And that's the question according to Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, according to the other interpretation in the Gemara. Okay. Now, in order to,
is that really the question? Because we don't know if there was Bia. Because if she got pregnant,
we're not talking about pregnant.
but if she would have gotten pregnant, you wouldn't say.
You wouldn't have that problem. No, that's why the Gemara itself.
They would say they were for sure married.
Yeah, because the Gemara even says here, "Umodim b'nitgarsha min ha'erusin she'enat tzricha himena get sheni mipnei she'ein libo gasba." Is we only talk about nitgarsha min hanisuin. That's when we have the machloket, because there the fact they had yichud together, according to Beit Hillel, is enough grounds to assume that there's bia since they were married. But if they were never married, if she was only in arusa in the past, then she was gerusha min ha'erusin. So then everybody agrees, since ein libo gaspa, the fact that they were alone together in a room and they're Eidim outside, the Eidim on the outside cannot say just because we're outside, we saw they were alone together, means that they had relations. Okay? Not every time a man and woman get in a room together do they have sexual relations. You don't have to over-sexualize men and women, right? But if they were married before, and etc., so then that's when you're choshesh. Okay? So that's the context of the Mishnah. That's how the Gemara explains it. Okay. Now, in order to understand this question, the second question of whether I'm willing to say, when I'm willing to say, hein hein eidei yichud, hein hein eidei bia, we have to step back for a second and talk about the necessity of edut l'kiyum davar by gittin and kiddushin. I'll just give you some background when it comes to that. That's why I gave you this sheet. Okay? I gave out this sheet at the beginning. Right? The Rambam is on one side, and I have a couple of Mekorot on the other side. B'li neder, I added these Mekorot to source sheet number 10, and I'll send it to you. I didn't want to confuse people before the shir, but I'll send. Yes, but I added it to source sheet number 10. So if you want, so you should have it in your computers. But I didn't send it out to you yet. Okay, so you'll have it, and then you'll have the complete set. Okay. Okay, the Gemara in Kiddushin on Daf Samech Hey asks, I didn't quote the whole question, just what the Gemara wants to answer here. The question is, Mekadesh al pi eid echad mahu. Person Mekadesh with only one aid present, not with two aidim. So machlokes in the Gemara concludes that ein chosheshin. There's no chashash of Kiddushin of Mekadesh al with aid echad. Okay? Then here, so the Gemara says, "My havi Allah." What do we say about this question of Mekadesh of the Eid Echad? Rav Kahana Amar, Ein Chosheshim L'Kiddushav. Okay, agree with me? Mm-hmm. Rav Papa Amar Chosheshim L'Kiddushav. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. My da'atech Diyalfit Davar Mi Mamon. In Mamon, it's Al Pishnei Edim Yakum Davar. And matzaba ervat davar. So because of that, ein damar shebervat pachot mishnai, right? So therefore, makadosh shel epi eid echad is no kiddushin. Hiyafit davar v'davar mamon. Ima lahalan hodad baldin k'mei eidim dami. Afkan hodad baldin k'mei eidim dami. If you learn out the necessity for two eidim from mamon, in mamon you don't always need two eidim. If the baldin is modeh, so you don't need eidim. Someone comes to me and says that I owe them money. They don't have Eidim. But I say, yes, it's true, I owe you money. So we don't need Eidim. Right? So Hodad Baldin Kemei Eidim Dami. So, but you don't say, even though there were no Eidim who were made on the loan. The loan took place. Right? And I'm Modeh, so I'm Chayav to pay based on my Hoda'ah. But if there's a Kiddushin, or if there's an act, and a man gives a woman a Shavah Pruta, it says Haret Mekudeshet Li, etc., and there's no aid present, and then they come to the woman, they say, do we makabel kiddushin? The man says yes, and there's the guy. We makabel yes. So there's still no kiddushin. There's no hodat baldin in gittin and kiddushin. So how can you derive davar mimamon and not have such a blatant difference of halacha between the two areas? Okay, Amalei. Here's what the Gemara is very strange. Hatam lo kechayev la'achrini. In the case of Dinim Amonot, we say Hodad Baldin K'mei Eidim Dami when there's no one who's injured as a consequence of my Hoda'ah. Okay? Hacha K'chayev L'Achrini. But when someone says that they're married, they're Chayev L'Achrini. It's damaging to other people. How it's damaging to other people is not our issue. It could mean that now all these other men wanted to marry this woman and now they can't, etc., etc. We don't have to get into it. You can see Rashi on the sugya, okay? But it's considered chav la'achrini, okay? So when there's the principle is that you do not say hodat baldin k'mei eidim dami b'makom shechav la'achrini, and arayot is always considered, the case of gittin kiddushin is always considered chav la'achrini, okay? Marzutu Rav Ada Saba B'nei de Rav Meri Bar Isser Palig Nachsayu Bahadi Adade. Right? They were dividing up the Yerusha. Okay? Atu L'kamei de Rav Ashi Amru le al pi shnei edim, amar Achmana, De'i bayim lemahadri lomatzi hadri behu, v'ana lo hadri, odil malo mekayim milta ela b'sahade. He said, should we have shnei edim to witness how we divide up the Yerusha, right, in order that, to make sure that nobody lies and then it comes up with other stories, no, we didn't divide it this way, divide it that way, so should we have edim, right? But we're honest, all the brothers here get along, so we don't need edim. Or maybe you need the edim present in order to give legal status to the division of property. Because in order to, let's say, execute the will, let's say, right, you would need edim present not just to obviate the possibility of somebody lying, but just to validate the process. Okay? So that was the question. Do we need edim here just to obviate lying and we all trust each other? Or do we need edim here to actually validate the process? Okay? That's the second statement. O dilma lo mekayma milta ela b'sahade. Hadavar lo mitkayem ela be'edim. Amar lahu lo ivru sahadi ela l'shakre. So he said we only have edim because of shakranim.
Ivru? Nivru.
Lo nivru, right? You only have edim because of shakranim. So if you guys get along and you trust each other, you don't need edim. You don't need edim l'kayem et hadavar, right? So in dinei mamonot, you don't need edut l'kayem hadavar, but you do need edut l'kayem hadavar when it comes to Gittin and Kiddushin, and paradoxically, that's learned out from Mammon somehow, okay? But not from the regular case of Mammon, but from the case of Mammon, which is Chav La'acharini. That's the data of this sugya here, okay? And so we have to understand what it's about, okay? What is the put it this way, what is the nature of the requirement of edut by Gittin and Kiddushin? Because it's clear that if a man is Mekadesh a woman and there are no edim, there's no Kiddushin. If a man is Megarish his wife and there's no edim, there's no Gerushin. The act was the same, but there's no edim, there's no kiddushin, and there's no gerushin. As opposed to dinei mamonot, these are just the facts. I'm not explaining anything, right? In dinei mamonot, if I give a loan and nobody knows about it, I gave you a loan. There's no witnesses. You're still chayav the money to me. You still have to pay me back, whether I can prove it or not. So maybe I was foolish for giving you a loan without demanding a shtar or without demanding edim. Okay? But if we do a sale, we agree to sale and we do a kinyan, so the kinyan takes place with or without edim, and there lo ivru sahadi ela l'shakre. Right? The only reason you would have edim is because you want to document it so that nobody can lie or forget or conveniently forget or whatever. Okay. So what's the nature of this requirement of edim that we have by Gittin and Kiddushin, which is different than edut as we naturally know it from dinei mamonot and from the world, right? There's no such thing as edut l'kiyum hadavar in the world, right? You just have testimony, you have witnesses in order to testify about something, but you have to clarify something, okay? So here, the most clear pronouncement is the Rambam in his explanation for this. Think of the Rambam, this is Hilchos Gerushin Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Gimel. The Rambam gives a list in the beginning of Hilchot Gerushin, which is not so far away. We'll be starting Gerushin soon. Some more sugyot here in Kiddushin. So the Rambam gives a list of all the things that are required in a get, and one of the things is Shi'etnen Allah, this is Sefer Kritut, Shi'etnen Allah b'fnei edim. Okay? And then in Halacha Yud Gimel, he goes back and describes each thing that you require by a get, and Halacha Yud Gimel he talks about edim. So u'inayin shitnen Allah b'fnei edim, that he has to give her the get b'fnei edim. Har'el hu omer, al pi shnayim edim o shlosha edim yakum davar. V'i efshar shetiyeh zo hayom erva v'haba aleha b'mitat beitin ולמחר תהיה מותרת בלא עדים. לפיכך אם נתן לה גט בינו לבינה, ואפילו בעד אחד, אינו גט כלל. It's just impossible that a change of status, which is so momentous, should be able to take place in private. Right? Now this is not unusual for the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't quote the Gemara. Right? The Rambam doesn't have the Rambam comes to it from a svara. Okay? It's not unusual. The Rambam does that when he doesn't quote the psukim and the source and the Gemara when he thinks that you have a strong svara. But in any case, so the Rambam thinks apparently that you require a dut l'kiyum hadavar in order to give gravity to the situation. In order to give gravity to the ritual. Okay? Something happens in private, it's less weighty than when something happens in public. And public, in this case, is two edim. Okay? The function of edim here, to bear witness and be constructive of the change of status, has nothing to do with edim from what we know about testimony, from hilchot edut of ne'emanut and figuring out what happened. It's not edut to levarer at all. It's edut to give gravitas to the situation. If you think about it, just go back to Tanakh. You think about Ruth, right? So there he assembled. I think it says that he assembled a minyan, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And the halacha is that nisuin is supposed to have a minyan present, right? So it's chal without it, right? But the fact that in Tanakh already you have the kol yotzei shar iro, that there's a public aspect to marriage is pretty basic. You shouldn't even have to prove it from sukkim. It's pretty basic in sociology. So what makes it public minimally? To edim make something a public act. And in order to have that gravitas, that's why you need the two edim. Okay? So that's the Rambam. Okay? Reb Chaim, we saw this because I gave you a piece when we talked about Ein Tnai B'Nisuin. I gave you a piece of Reb Chaim from Hilchot Chalitza, if you recall. You can go back to that discussion, where he says he distinguishes between two different types of halachic actions. One where there is what you could call a gavra, in other words, a halachic actor who actually precipitates whatever change we're talking about, a mekadesh, a megaresh, a koneh, okay? And another situation where the person or the people involved are passive. They're like cheftzes rather than gavras, right? They're passive, and it's just the confluence of circumstances which by themselves create a halachic change. The meat fell off the cupboard into the boiling milk, and it created basa b'chalav. There was no ma'isa of bishol basa b'chalav. Basa b'chalav was nitbashel, right? So in that sense, you have certain halachic situations which are just products of circumstances rather than products of da'at, right? Of focused halachic action, put it that way, or intent. And Reb Chaim distinguishes between Git and Kiddushin on one hand, and Yibum and Chalitza on the other hand. Okay? That's what we talked about. And Chuppah falls into the Yibum and Chalitza category as opposed to the Kiddushin category, and that's why you can't make it tonight, etc. That's what we talked about. So, connected to this...
Wait, say again what he distinguishes between...
between he says in chalitza there's no necessity of dat. You just need ratzon. You have to know what you're doing. We want to do it, but you don't need dat.
And chuppah was supposed to be like
And
that.
chuppah's like that, which is
Right.
why there would be no t'nai. There's no t'nai b'chuppah because you can only make a condition. This is a little bit of chazar. You can only make a condition on a halachic circumstance that you have ownership over. Right? If you're the makneh, if you're the baal, then you can make the t'nai. But in the chalitza, you're not baalim over the situation. We just need your shoe. We just need we just need spit. We just need whatever we need in this chulent to be matter this woman. Okay?
And Yibum you also do?
And Yibum also you don't. Okay? So,
Only Kiddushin. So Kiddushin.
Kiddushin and Gittin, right? And Kinyanim. And Kinyanim, wherever you can make a Tanai, and you can make a Shaliach. That was the point of the Reb Chaim. So, in that context, right, Reb Chaim says, that's why you don't need a dut l'kiyum hadavar by chuppah, and you don't need a dut l'kiyum hadavar by Yibum and Chalitza. You do need a dut l'kiyum hadavar by Gittin and Kiddushin. Why? He says the function of a dut l'kiyum hadavar is to help crystallize the da'at of the halachic actors. Okay? You need a dut l'kiyum hadavar. I need more da'at to be mekadesh or megaresh than I do to go when I go and buy some milk. Okay?
But you just said that Kinyan did need that.
It needs da'at, but it doesn't need the same level of da'at, is what Reb Chaim would say, that Gittin and Kiddushin require. And that's why you need a dut l'kiyum hadavar. The function of a dut l'kiyum hadavar, according to Reb Chaim, is pretty close. I mean, that's how you reach the Rambam, pretty close to the way we describe the Rambam, not to lend gravitas to the action, but actually to make the situation so severe, not severe in a negative sense, but so serious that the person that's doing this is doing it b'da'at, that is required.
But
Okay?
that's quite different than what you explained just before, right?
Right, it's different, right? But what's in common is both these functions of a dut l'kiyum hadavar have nothing to do with traditional understandings of what a dut is. Right? You could even not even call it a dut if you don't want to call it a dut. Right? We call it a dut l'kiyum hadavar, but it's very different than a dut in dinei mamonot. And the reason we have a dut in dinei mamonot is we want to know what happened. You want to make sure you can verify what happened. Right? Okay. The Ktsot, his understanding of a dut l'kiyum hadavar is closer to, he brings it closer to the basic understanding of what a dut is. And he says, let me take a look, this is part of a longer Ktsot. It's the last source on the page here. He says, Im ken yalif shapir davar davar mimamon, ma hatam al pishnayim edim yakum davar, de'ein kima ledavar, hein lekinyan, o lishar ma'aseh, el al pi edim. Ela degabe mamon, theoretically you need a dut l'kiyum davar and dinei mamonot as well. And kinyanim as well, right? Ela de gabe mamon baldin hu ha'aid. In dinei mamonot, the baldin can be an aid. So you always have a dut l'kiyum hadavar. Ubegittin v'kiddushin by edim ksherim mishum the baldin ain't no aid. And that's because it's chav l'achrin. That's the hemshech. Okay, but what he's saying is that basically the requirement of a dut by Gittin v'Kiddushin is the same as the requirement of a dut in Dinei Mamonot. In Dinei Mamonot, sometimes in lieu of the a dut, the Baal Davar is also an aid, which you can't have in Gittin Kiddushin. But that's a very secondary type of distinction between the areas. Okay? He says, let's see. One second. Okay. He says, 3 lines to the bottom, 4 lines to the bottom, the end of the line. Ulezem shani hatam lo mechayev la'achrini. Shani hatam lo mechayev la'achrini. In Dinei Mamonot, the Hodat Baldin is ne'eman when it's not, when it doesn't damage somebody else's interests. Baldin ne'eman. Mishum hachi lo ivru sahadi elo l'shakre. And there, since you have the there, the whole reason you have edim is because of the shakranim. Aval hacha mechayev la'achrini v'lo yivada davar la'alma al pi hoda'atam kevan she'ein ne'emanim behoda'atam v'kiyum davar ba'ay edim lahachi tzarich edim ksherim v'kevan she'lo tkayim hadavar mishum hachi mutar l'krovoteh. So he says that the problem is that without the edim, there's no way of knowing. You'll never be able to establish what happened, because it'll be chav lachrini, and you won't believe the woman, you won't believe the man when they say they were married, but they won't have ne'emanut. So the only way that you have ne'emanut is to have 2 edim. So the function of the edim is regular edim. There's the reason you have edut l'kiyum hadavar according to the Ktsot is because you have to be able to prove it. You have to be able to prove there was a wedding in order to have a wedding. The same thing, you have to be able to prove there was a kinyan in order to have a kinyan. But it has to do with the ability to prove it, right? As opposed to either giving the action gravitas or making the person have gemirudat. No, you have to be able to prove it. Okay. Now, there's some very important, a simple nafkaminot between these different approaches. Okay. For example, here's a cute one. This is like an achronish type question, right? Can psule edus derabanan be made on kiddushin d'oraisa? You say a person's puzzle. They're psule edut midrabanan, right? Person is a gambler by profession, right? Politician by profession, right? So he says puzzle edus midrabanan, right? So. Could say, and he's an aid at a wedding. So he's only pasal edus d'rabbanan mido rice. He's kashul edus, right? So he should be. So the wedding should be good. But there's room to say that since this person's testimony befoal is not admissible in court, you'll never be able to prove it. So since the edut l'kiyum hadavar has to do with the ability to prove the kiddushin. So the fact that the person is pasal edut midrabanan is irrelevant. Only midrabanan is irrelevant, and therefore the kiddushin won't be good. Psula edut midrabanan are pasal midoraita for kiddushin, because it means that it's not provable.
If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. Meaning,
right. If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist.
If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist, and therefore you don't have to be choshesh to it either.
Correct.
I don't get that.
In other words, it's necessary. When you have kiddushin, it's necessary to have them in a way which is verifiable in court. If it's not verifiable in court, then the kiddushin are not chal, right? And that's the way kinyanim are also.
Could you do that again? I missed that.
He's basically saying that in order to have kiddushin, the
explain?
Ktsot, he's saying that the requirement of edut l'kiyum hadavar means that the act of kiddushin or of gerushin has to be verifiable in court. You have to be able to prove it. Okay? So, for example, if you say that the reason you need edut l'kiyum hadavar is that the people should have gemirudat, so it's reasonable to assume that the people have to know that the edim are there, right? If I give a woman several persons I have the concession and I think there are no edim there, and it turns out there are edim there, but I didn't know they were there, so that they were not there to influence my gemirudat, right? So it didn't influence my gemirudat. It probably didn't add to the gravitas of what was going on, but it is provable in court. See the difference? So these issues come up, right? So the Achron is there a Rishon that actually.
According to gravitas, would be okay?
Psulei midrabanan? Maybe. Could be.
I don't know. How
I can see both. There it's not there, it's a little less clear. But clearly, if you say that it needs to be verifiable in court, then Psulei midrabanan cannot verify in court. We won't admit them.
But I'm saying, even if it was just for me to have crystallize my data, if I think the person couldn't testify to it in court.
But it doesn't have to do with their ability to testify. It has to do with there are 2 people here present.
So could you have women?
That'd be edim. So they're not women.
But why do they have to be the edim according to edim of court?
davar mimamo,
For that.
right? Okay. Yeah.
Is it possible just for a few minutes to review the qualifications of Eidim, specifically for Kiddushin? Because
You
it's
mean, want to know what the Psulei Edut are?
Yeah.
I'd rather not do it now. There's a list in the Rambam Hilchos Eidos. I don't remember what the number is. There's Psul Russia. There's Psul Russia. There's Kirva. There's Nogeh B'Davar. There's Nashim. There are lists of Psulim, and for different reasons.
In
Yeah.
some mamon cases, if the Baalei Din are willing to accept.
Yeah, of course.
So the
Yeah, in some
Baalei
cases,
Din
women are also acceptable,
Right, so then-
but not in the ritual requirement, because it's not. Again, I don't want to get into a whole discussion of Dina Edut. If you want, sometimes we can get into a whole discussion. Women are acceptable for a different reason, not as Eidim. They're acceptable as circumstantial evidence, which the judge has the what's the word? Has the discretion. The halacha gives judges a certain amount of discretion. It's called kimli. It's a sugya in Tubot on Daf Pei. It's kimli begava. That was it. One of the Amoraim believed Bat Rav Chizda. She came and she said, "This guy is a pasul edus. Don't believe him." So he pasuled the shtar based on what she said. So he said, "What Nashim?" So he said, "Bat Rav Chizda kimli begava." I believe her. Right? Now, from there you learn that there's this discretionary power the judges are given. It's in the Rambam also in Perek Dal and Hilchos Sanhedrin. Right? Yesh l'dayan ladun l'fi re'udei now. He starts the Perek like that. So that's where it's under that seif that women are brought in today. It's all kimli begava. It's circumstantial evidence, but we don't have Din Torah today anyway, so they accept all sorts of people as Eidim. Right?
But is there
Okay,
room for, to change this, within halachic parameters? I mean, women like Psulei Edut, that's like a huge
That's a huge thing.
huge thing, which is really very,
huge
very
thing.
disturbing.
It's a huge thing, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, you have to.
Particularly,
You have to do more
forget
than a
about
few
the
minutes of research on it
conversion
to try
issues
to.
when women convert
What?
and all that stuff going on now. But
But that has nothing to do with Eidut.
I understand
That's a question
that
about
there is an
B'fnei
issue
Beitin,
with
what
Eidut.
B'fnei Beitun is. Okay.
But, what is the reason today that women are Psulei Edut halachically? What's the reason?
The reason is because it says Ish, right? Api Ish Eid Echad or Shnei Eidim, right? Ish v'lo Isha. It's a technical psul, right? You can look in the there's a Tosat HaRush in Sanhedrin, I think, on Daf Chav Daled, where he says that the psul edut of Isha has nothing to do with the psul ne'emanut. It's not because of Russia. It's not because of Nogeh B'Davar. It's not because of Kaludat. It's Gzerat. It's Gzerat HaKatuv. Ish v'lo Isha. Take it for what it's worth, right? Okay. But I want to continue here. I mean, obviously, these type of halachot were obviously said when women were not active in the business world. They were not active. They were not active socially. They basically stayed home, and the courts were like shul. Men go to shul. Women don't go to shul. Men go to court. Women don't go to court. Like, what's a woman doing here in court? What are you going to do with a woman in court? Like, you have to all of a sudden behave nicely, and you can't scream at the Baltinian, right? So it's a different. Yes, we do. So. All right.
If you want to say the Svara is just about if it would stand in the court, then you could make the claim that a Baldin would listen to an Isha.
That's interesting. If it's just
No?
that's interesting. That's very interesting. Let's file that one. Okay, let's file that one.
A positive
Positive hope, a ray of hope and all this. Okay. Okay. So we have, that's just sort of as a background, to understand that we require a dut in Gittin and Kiddushin fundamentally in a way which is different than Dinei Mamonot. Either it's really it has nothing to do with Dinei Mamonot. Dinei Mamonot, it's just to clarify what happened. When you talk about Gittin and Kiddushin, it has to do with giving gravitas to making it, because you're having a change of status here, and you can't have a change of status without Eidim. Right, that's the Rambam. Or Chaim's understanding is that the function is to solidify the dot of the halachic actors, or bringing it closer in the direction of the Ktsos, bringing it closer to what we know is Eidut. But what it means is that the act of Gittin and Kiddushin has to be verifiable. Okay, and that's why you need Eidim. Okay, and if it's not verifiable, it's not valid. Okay, you have to add that. If it's not verifiable, it's not valid. Okay. Okay, so that's in general. So what about let's go back to Kiddushay Bia, right? So when we talk about Kiddushay Bia, so the regular case, there's the Rambam here in the Choti Shut in Perek Gimel Achahed. He says, "In Kiddush Bibia, Omer laharet mukudeshet li, or et mureset li, or et li leisha bebiila zo." Very romantic. V'chol keyotzei bazeh.
I'm sorry?
Hilchot Ishut Gimel Hey. It's the first page of source of the page 10. Okay. V'chol keyotzei bazeh. U'mityachedim b'fnei shnei edim u'boala. Okay. V'mekadesh b'biyas mistama da'ato al gmar biyah. Okay, etc. V'im kidesh b'biyah. So look at the Magid Mishnah. Begitin Perek HaZorek. Amrinan hein edei yichud, hein edei biyah. Upashutu shekol omer shal dat lekatsha mityachedim v'hu b'fnei edim hein edei biyah. Okay, there it's pashut. There everybody agrees you don't need edim on the biyah. Edei yichud are sufficient. Okay, so what this means is, listen, with regards to Kiddushay biyah, the kiddushin is the biyah. It's not the yichud. Right? We're not talking about being mekadesh al chuppah. Right? We're talking according to the dayot that chuppah is konah. Right? We're talking about kiddushin al biyah. But you don't have to see the biyah, okay? And you don't even have to see the way the Gemara in Makot says for onshim, kiderech hamina'afim. Okay, you can take a look back here. So they, Rabbi Tav, the famous. This is your doctorate, okay? See if I know his Mishnah Baal Peh, right? This is Misha's doctorate, okay? Rabbi Tav, that how Chazal effectively eliminated capital punishment. Rabbi Taf and Rabbi Akiva Omrim.
Now where are you?
And the same sort of page, the one source up. Ilu hayinu, right? We could have eliminated mitat beit din entirely. Heiklavi avdi. So the Gemara says what they actually do. Right? We could have said Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, Darmi Tarvai, Ritem, Treifa harag, Shalem harag. Right? How you can always find some question in the case, because the halacha is that if someone kills a treifa, then there's no misas bezdin. So, but the person wasn't a treifa. How do you know? So you do an autopsy. Fine, but maybe dafka where the bullet hit his lung, there was a sircha there, so you can't know 100%, right? And what about bia? Shalom avadim makom sayif nekev hava. Did you see it actually? Okay, so it's true. They didn't see the bia. Kishmuel, damar Shmuel b'mina'afim misheyera'u k'mina'afim. Okay, you don't have to see kimchol. Let's call them kimchol b'shfoferet. It's enough that you see them together, the way mina'afim are together. I mean, minafim could be together and there is no penetration. Nobody saw. But there's a chazaka, and that's good enough because that's what there is. And you can kill based on that. Okay? Whereas Rabbi Tarfon refused to use even that level of evidence. Okay? They need kim b'chol b'shfoferet, and obviously there was never that level of evidence. Okay? But when it comes to kiddushin, al yedei bia, we don't require that. Right? Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva did not eliminate kiddushay bia. Right? They just want to eliminate capital punishment. Okay? So it's enough that there was a day yichud, and since everybody gathered for the purpose of the wedding, so we assume that there was bia. Okay? let's take a look at an analogous case. This is really a really strange, funny case. Okay, this is from Shut HaRashba. Okay, so Rashba says as follows. Yeah, Tafshin Pei. Right, it's Tshuva Tafshin Pei. Yeshivo b'shnayim shayu omdim acharei gader bayit echad. They were like on the other side of the wall. V'shamu shamaru vein l'leah hitkatshili be'etrog. Avalo ra'u netina mamash. She's heard it, right? Va'afilu ra'u etrog yotzei mitachat yada. Right. Then afterwards they came out and she was holding the esrog. Right. Ein kan chshash shel klum. Afilu hi moda shelakachto l'shem kiddushin. The edut re'iyah, it should be v'yedi'ah baya, mamash. They have to see it and they have to know. This would be knowledge without seeing. Okay? So it's not enough. Okay? In Kiddushay Bia, the equivalent is enough, right? They don't see what happens. They hear him say, Haret Mekudeshet li b'biyazo, but they don't see it. And then they come out and everybody says, Smiles on their smiles on their faces, right? So, and they're moda that that's what happened. Okay? But nonetheless, in Kiddushay Kesef it's not good. In Kiddushay Bia it is good. Okay? Yeah. Hold on. We have to figure this out. He asks why also. Take a look. There's another case here from Aleph Kuf Tzadi Gimel. Sha'alta isha sheyatza leha kol chashash kiddushin shekitsha Reuven והוזקקו בית דין לעניין ובאו לפניהם העדים שיצא הכל שהיו עדי הקידושין. Right, these are people who heard that these were the Eidim. They asked, "V'chakru habeit din et ha'edim, zeh shel b'fnei zeh, v'nimtzeit edutan mechuvenet, udvarim acherim shehem lo hizminan Reuven hamekadesh la'id." Ella, this is what really happened. Ra'u oto nichnas lebayit shota isha sham, v'etrog biyado, v'achorei ha'edim al petach habayit. ושמעו שראובן זה אמר ראי אתרוג זה אני נותן לך לקידושין ולא ראו שום נתינה בעולם מידו לידה וכשיצא אותו ראובן מהבית ראה אחד מאלו העדים האתרוג ביד נערה אחרת שהייתה איתה בבית. It gets interesting, right? ושמע עד זה שאמרה אישה לאחותה בעלת הבית ראי מה אמר זה ואחר שנחקרה עדותן של עדים בבית דין, כמו שנזכר, כתבו בית דין לאישה שטר מעשה בית דין שאין שום חשש של קידושין בדבר זה, והתירו על להינשא. Okay, that was what happened. הודיעני, this was the שואל to the Rashba, אם דנו יפה, לפי עדותן של עדים או לא. What do you think about this psak? Okay? So he says, he's given tshuva, יפה דנו. ויפה התירו. ואיני רואה לפי עדותן של עדים שום חשש בדבר זה. וכבר ידעת שמקדש שלא בשני עדים, אפילו שניהם מודים, אינה מקודשת. דאלפינן דבר מממון. כלומר, מדבר של ממון שבמקום הכחשה. In ממון, when you don't have הודעת בעל דין. Right? הלקח אפילו שמעו שהוא אמר אתרוג זה אני נותן לך לקידושין, והיא שותקת. אין כאן בית מחוש, אפשר שלא קיבלתהו, ולא עוד, אפילו ראינו את רוג יוצא עכשיו מתחת ידה, doesn't matter, right? Because you need עדות ראייה וידיעה בעינה, okay? I'm skipping down, and here's the conclusion. לגבי קידושין, 4 lines on the bottom, עדות ממש בעיה, והודעת שניהם כמי שאינה. If they just said they're molded that that's what happened, it's totally irrelevant. You need עדות, what he calls עדות ממש. אם כן, לעולם אינה מקודשת, אלא במקום שיש עדים גמורים שאינם יכולים להכחישן. Only when you have testimony which is ironclad, which you cannot deny. Right? This is, well, it sounds like the Ktos. The Rashba was before the Ktos, right? It sounds like this is consistent with the Ktos. You need edut she'ef shar lahakrisho. Okay, and so then what do you say? Again, what do you do with Hein Edei Yichud, Hein Edei Bia? If Shalach Chisho, years later she can get up, or he can get up and say, you know what? We pulled a fast one over everybody, right? And what can the Edom say? We didn't think so, right? But we were standing outside, so it's Edut Shef Shalach Chish. They don't know. There's only a Chazaka, okay? And they need Edut Mamash. So here, there are a number of attempts to deal with this. What?
About Kiddushay Bia and how that works?
Yeah. So here there's here there are a number of different answers. So the Tshuvot Maimoniot, actually the third answer is extremely important. Let's see. He says, Gdula Mizo, ever see it?
No.
Tshuvot Maimoniot, Hilchot Yishut Siman Aleph. It's in the Rashi printing. Gdula Mizo,
Where is
it's
it?
the next page. Nearly,
Where?
the next page.
This, right at the top, the first words.
Okay.
Okay? וגדולה מזו נראה לי, אפילו חזו סהדי שנכנסים על הקדשה בכסף, ולא ראו שקידשה, right? לא בא יגט, right? כיוון דלא חזו ממש שקידשה, דווקא בביאה אמרינן הן עדי ייחוד, הן עדי ביאה. Okay? Oh, so finally somebody noticed the difference. Okay? Mishum, okay, here are the reasons. De'ika l'neimar, eish bina'oret ve'ena mahavhevet. Okay, so it's yediyah vada'it. Right? Passions, fire, if they went into the room and they're getting married, then that's a chazaka. Okay? So that, it is if they saw the biyah. Okay? That's one. Okay? V'od, Mipnei shelibo gasba, the same type of answer. Okay? That would be the case of lan be pundaki imishto. It's mipnei shelibo gasba. Okay? V'od, and this is really interesting. Okay? V'od, kevan she'i efshar lirot kimchol b'shvoferet, dignaihu, V'lo misaro hakatuv ela lechachamim. V'chi hai gavna amrinan b'masechet makot tekatlinan mi sheyera'u kederach hamina'afim. Af al pi shelo ra'u kimechol b'shoferet. Af al gav de'ika lemitlei dilma derech evarim ba'aleha talinan b'milta dahavi karov levadai v'katlinan. Okay? So every situation is different. In Dinei Onshim, they didn't rely on Hein Edei Yichud, Hein Edei Bia. The Edom there have to see Kederach HaMina'afim, but Derech HaMina'afim still doesn't prove that there was Bia. They didn't see the Bia. Okay? But that's got to be good enough. And Misarana Katuv L'Chachamim, and when it comes to Kiddushay Bia, Ritamei Tzniut, Chachamim can determine, this is very interesting in terms of the Tevila issue for Gerus, right? Chachamim can determine what level of evidence is required, even if I'm talking about a case which is D'Oraita. Right? So, mi D'Oraita, you need Edut L'Kiyum HaDavar, Davar Mimamon. And when you talk about Kiddushay Kesef or Kiddushay Shtar, you have to see the Ma'aseh itself. It's not good enough to hear that he gave it to her and see and Havodai afterwards. There you have to see it, Kimchol B'Shvoferet. There you have to see the Ma'aseh Netinah. But in Bia, since we don't want to require Kimchol B'Shoferet, and we don't even want to require Kederech, to see people Kederech Bia, right? So there we say, Hein Edei Bia. This is different than the first two reasons of Eish Bina'oret Ve'ena Mehavhevet. Okay?
Do you think they're also like to get built together? Meaning,
I'm
A,
not
we don't feel comfortable, and B, come on, that's most likely what happened.
Yeah, but the adding and to the of Lo Masana Katuv Ela Chachamim and comparing it to Dinei Onshim, he's saying something really new here, right? This has to do with the stuff we were talking about when we do the Mashilach on the nature of halacha, right? For those of you who hang around for that, right? That we're talking about the halacha. We're so used to these distinctions. A brisker would never begin to understand, like, what does this mean? What does this tshuva mean? How do you say such a thing? Masrana katuv l'chachamim. There's a doraisa halacha. They need edut. So how can you say that for kesef you need it this way and for b you need it that way? What does masrana katuv l'chachamim help you here? So it means that the distinctions that we're so used to when we talk about distinguishing with the doraisa and the rabbanan, they may be useful distinctions, but on some level, when push comes to shove, the doraisas are also the rabbanans, in the sense that the whole understanding of what is a doraisa and what is the rabbanan is chachamim decided that, right? So the whole edifice of the distinction between doraisa and the rabbanan on a certain level breaks down. That's what happens. There's a little line here in a Chuvas Maimonios, which is Lo Masana Katuv Ela Chachamim, is you have a din d'oraita, which Chachamim decided, for tznius reasons, you can't require edus here the way you require elsewhere. V'zeh ma sheyesh. And Chachamim do that. And now that's the halacha d'oraita. Okay? That's extremely important. The ramification of this is way beyond hein hein hey de yichud hein hein hey de bia.
But they also had
What?
It's kind of obvious. We just looked together and said, it's obvious.
It's not so. It's obvious. It's one of these things. It's obvious after you know
Where
it.
put the phone? And then Chazal tell you, they're boxes, they're made of leather, they're black, they had this in, what?
Halacha
You didn't
Moshe
think it was,
Messina. God told Moshe.
Yeah, I was good. Right. Also in Hilchot Yisur V'Heter, like from last year, there are many issues that we say.
Let's. You can talk about different issues. The reason that this is mechudash, I agree, it shouldn't be a chiddush, right? Not say why it's a chiddush, so it's not a chiddush, right? But in general, when you talk about Masrana Katuv L'Chachamim, in the type of things like the Inuyim of Yom Kippur, or the Isser Malacha on Chol HaMoed, even if the sheet of the Ran, in Inuyim on Yom Kippur, is that they're all midoraisa, the Misarana Katuv L'Chachamim. That's what he says. In other words, as opposed to what you generally think that only Achil and Shtia is doraisa and everything else is D'Rabbanan, so he says it's all doraisa. But there are certain things which are explicitly doraisa, and beyond that, the Torah wanted that Yom Kippur should be a Yom of Inui. It says, V'initem et nafshotechem, and then it says, you Chachamim, you make sure that Yom Kippur is a day of Inui. And Chachamim said, okay, let's look for psukim that talk about Inui, and we'll say that Rechitza, not being mitrachetz is also Inui, not putting on shoes is also Inui, and mitanef from B is also Inui. So we'll add these things. We decided these things are Inuyim, but we're working with a Doraita mandate, so to speak. That's still much less revolutionary than what he's saying here. Here you have basically Chachamim taking a din d'oraita. You require a dut, and saying, you're right, the level of evidence generally required, and it's midoraita. If you don't have this level of evidence for kiddushin, this woman does not need a get, and she can marry somebody else, and the children are fine.
You created the idea in the first place that you need Adam for this thing.
It's okay. All right.
Anything. You read the Torah, it says one thing. You look at Torah, it says another thing.
No, so, but
that
even
is
within
like
Torah Shabbat that. So now you're like so far gone that you don't even preach the Kiddush anymore. Fine, I'm preaching to the choir. Good. Okay, fine. Yeah.
It's a slippery slope.
The only other thing, if I want to save the traditional view, but yeah, I appreciate this. If I want to save the traditional view, and I say that Masarah Katuv L'Chachamim, that it has to do with what's verifiable. The Edut L'Kiyum Davar is connected to where the Ktsot says to what's verifiable. Okay, so this is as much as you're going to be able to verify, right? And that Masarah Katuv L'Chachamim. Chachamim, it's a circle. When Chachamim say you don't have to see the bia, they'll say you'll never be able to verify more than this because I don't require you to see the bia. So the Kiddushin has to be verifiable in court. If they come to me, I'm the dayan. They come to me and they say it was kedusha kesef. I say, okay, prove it. And two edim say, we were standing there and we heard her say, I said, get out of here, right? Why didn't you see it, right? And they come and say, yeah, we saw the kedusha, very good. So that I accept that, right? I will accept nothing less. But in Bia, because Chachamim instructed me that in Bia, that I should not seek that level of certainty, I'll accept a lower level of certainty. They say, yes, he was Makadisher, they took her in the room, and we were standing outside, and we were the Eidei Yichud, and I'll say, yeah, that's good enough. That's verifiable in court. That's the level that you need to verify in court. So I just undid what everything says Pashut here, right? Is that this doesn't prove that Chacham can do whatever they want, right? It has to do with how you understand Edut L'Kiyum Hadavar. The first two Terutzim understand that you need Vada'ut, every place, okay? The second approach is that you don't need Vada'ut, you need verifiability. And Chachamim can decide what level of certainty you require under different circumstances in order to verify something in court. It's a different way of understanding it. Okay? Sorry to disappoint everybody. Okay? I'm also disappointed by that shot in. Okay? We also have...
Yeah, why you don't see that second one is also subjective.
I don't know what you mean by subjective. What do you mean by subjective?
I mean, your claim is Torah requires Edut to be provable in court. And now we say that the Chachamim can have the right to determine...
Yeah, but then they come in on level 2. That's perfectly fine. The same way that Psule Edus D'Rabbanan can be puzzled for Kiddushin D'Oraita because it's not verifiable in court. Something which normally would not be accepted, but they decided to accept, that makes it verifiable in court. Verifiable in court is okay, so they can decide what's verifiable in court. Just like Chacham can say something is Asur Bahana Midrabanan, like the sugya about the Kadesh, the Chametz, the Shah Chamishit, right? So, because Chacham said that it's Asur Bahana, Midrabanan it's Asur Bahana, right? Midoraita, it doesn't have value, right? It doesn't matter why it's Asur Bahana, it's Asur Bahana, so it has no value Midoraita, so it's not a Shem Pruta. So the Chachamim can play with the background before they set the stage, and then the Doraita comes in later. The Doraita deals with the reality, part of which was created by Chachamim. That's totally normal.
But are you claiming that it's only within D'Rabbanan that we accept the Edut?
No. Rabbanan can decide what level of evidence you require when you talk about verifiability. If there was a ritualistic requirement, the way the Rashba says, that Yediyah v'Riyah ba'inan edut gamur, right? Then you have to say the first things that you find in the Jewish Maimonios. That it's like Eish ben Na'oret. You have to, this is Barur. This is Barur, it's equivalent to Barur. And the second thing says, I know it's not Barur, but Masrana Ketub L'Chachamim. The last thing I want to point out here is this Avnei Biluin talks about an interesting case. I figured you would enjoy this case. The Frum weddings, where the veil is so thick you can't see who the kala is. So he starts off by talking about that the kiddushin isn't chal because the Edom can't see the kala, so they don't know who she's mekadesh, right? So it's a good point. So, but it's not 100%
Don't
clear.
worry, it doesn't come out that way.
So he talks about that. He talks about here also, again, the possibility of having a dut mukcheshet. The fact that afterwards you take off the veil and they look at her, the question is whether that helps or not, because b'shat kiddushin they still didn't know who it was. Or mitzad sheni, they saw the ma'aseh kiddushin, they just didn't know who the woman was. That is just a trivial fact, which is trivial, legally trivial. Okay, that's just a trivial. Well, you can talk to Yaakov Avinu about that. That's a trivial. It's a trivial fact, right? Which you can be mevarer afterwards. It's not part of the ma'aseh kiddushin. Right, so that's what he kicks back. That's what the Avnei Miluim kicks back and forth. Okay, so one more thing. So when we talk about hein ede yichud, hein ede bia under normal circumstances, so it is either. So in order to understand that, we have to understand what this requirement bichlal of edut l'kiyum hadavar is, getting kiddushin. So it's either something which is still connected to edut, verifiability. That's the halacha that's learned that davar mimamon. That mitzvah svara, the simple svara, if you go to the limud, makes the most sense because testimony is testimony and it has to do with verifiability. Or you go in the direction of Chaim or the Rambam, where it's a more formal requirement, either to give gravitas to the ritual or to give gravitas to the situation that the person should have. The person should have gemir dat, and we talked about the nafkaminot, and it plays out in not knowing 100% that there was bia and relying on the fact that there was bia. So is that enough or not? Depends on whether you talk about it in terms of verifiability or if you talk about a formal requirement. Okay, so that's what we saw here in this Jewish